Hi everyone, and today I'm checking out a lens that I've wanted to look at for a very long time now, the Lomography Petzval 85mm f2.2. This lens is a serious head turner. If you use it, then a lot of people will be asking you questions about what camera you're using. It came out in 2013 with backing from a Kickstarter campaign, and it can be bought directly from Lomography for £459 or $600 US. I'd like to thank Lomography UK for sending me this lens for testing for a couple of weeks, although as usual this is an independent review which is not sponsored by them in any way. The lens is modelled on a classic Petzval design from 1840, the first lens designed to allow fast maximum apertures. Not only is it optically modelled on the Petzval formula, but the build quality reflects the original Petzval lenses too, being made of brass, having insertable aperture plates and focus control built into the side. So why would anyone want to use a Petzval lens on a modern camera? After all, the original Petzval optical formula isn't particularly sharp, and it gives a strong field curvature, which leaves you with very soft corners in your images. Well, the unique advantage of Petzval optics is that they give you a very swirly looking, blurry background, which is very distinctive. On a full frame camera, the bokeh swirls around your subject in an ethereal way. Not everyone will appreciate that, but I actually really like it. Especially when bright points of light are involved, you can get some pretty attention-grabbing shots. The effect isn't very strong if you're using an APS-C camera though, as most of it is cropped out. This lens was born to be used as a portrait lens on full-frame cameras. You'll need to be about 2 meters away from your subject for best results, and you'll also need to make sure you have an interesting background to shoot against. It's a lens that really makes you think about your backgrounds. The maximum aperture is f2.2, so the lens lets in quite a lot of light. You can stop down that aperture using special aperture plates, although this will diminish the swirly bokeh effect. You can even get aperture plates from Lomography with special shapes stamped into them for some really interesting looking bokeh. My only concern is that it could be very easy to lose those aperture plates around the place, as they can actually fall straight out of the lens itself if you turn it upside down, so be careful with them. There's actually a special aperture plate for f2.2 which you should fit into the lens to prevent dust from getting inside. The lens's general build quality is wonderful, with lovely fit and finish all around. It is of course very tough, being made of brass, with that nifty manual focus ring on the side, with distance indicated at the top. The focus ring could do with being a touch more precise, but actually it's quite easy to pull focus with the lens, especially if you're shooting in live view mode on your camera. The lens comes with pouches and a very nice brass lens hood, which slips on and off quite easily. Perhaps a bit too easily, as this too is liable to fall off by accident. However, the optics are recessed very deeply into the lens as a built-in lens hood, so the glass elements are quite well protected from scratches or lens flaring when bright lights are nearby. As I said, the lens is built really nicely and it's a thing of serious beauty. It genuinely is a real head turner. You just have to be a little careful not to lose those aperture plates or the lens hood. Well, let's take a look at image quality. Firstly, on a full frame camera, a 20 megapixel Canon 6D. The Petzval lens design itself is not a particularly sharp one, so I feel a bit bad putting the lens through this kind of testing. As you can see though, the picture quality is quite usable in the middle of the image at f2.2. It's not very sharp, but it is good enough for portrait pictures, which is what this lens is designed for. Picture quality, as expected, quickly falls apart as you look into the corners. Stop the aperture down to f2.8 for a little more brightness in those corners and a nice improvement in sharpness back in the middle. Stop down to f4 or f5.6 for excellent sharpness in the middle of the image, although the corners are still pretty bad. You have to stop down to f11 or ideally f16 for sharp corners. So the Petzval lens behaves as expected on a full frame camera. We get extremely soft corners, but that's simply part and parcel of what this lens is, and the fact that it's clearly a lens designed for portraiture means that you don't really need sharp corners anyway. As I mentioned earlier, the lens isn't really intended for use on APS-C cameras as their smaller sensors crop out all that swirly bokeh, and the image quality on APS-C isn't very good at all anyway. Here's my test chart on an 18 megapixel Canon 60D. At f2.2, the picture is very soft and the corners are dreadful. They're not much better at f2.8 and the middle of the image is still weak. At f4 or f5.6, we begin to get useful image quality in the middle of the image, but not in the edges. Again, stop down to f11 or f16 for best picture quality. So the Petzval 85mm lens really is only truly happy on a full frame camera. Let's see about distortion and vignetting on full frame. We can see here that the lens projects just a touch of pincushion distortion. That's actually desirable for portrait photography, as it'll make the person you're shooting look a little thinner. At f2.2, we get quite dark corners. Stop down to f2.8 for a slight reduction in that vignetting, and at f4, it's gone. The lens can focus as closely as about 1 meter, a little further than average for an 85mm lens. Close-up picture quality is pretty soft at f2.2, a touch better at f2.8, good enough at f4, and sharp at f5.6. The lens's built-in hood generally keeps flaring from bright light out of the way. However, if you do get a very bright light in your picture, then you will definitely get some strong flaring. And so finally, the bokeh. As you might have guessed, I really do like the quality of the bokeh this lens produces, and that is the lens's main selling point. It works very well if you can find a busy background to work against, or some bright lights to dot their way through. That kind of bokeh may not be to everyone's taste, and that's fine, but even a critic would be surprised how much fun it actually is to get those swirly backgrounds going. It really draws attention to your subject in the middle of the picture. At the end of the day, this is an attention-grabbing and unique portrait lens for full-frame camera owners. Obviously, I do wish it was sharper, but that's simply not what Lomography were trying to do, and that's fair enough. It's also a very enjoyable lens to use, as well as being a historical curio in many ways. If you want to own a thing of beauty and/or get creative and have your portrait pictures stand out from the crowd, and you have £450 going spare, then this piece of kit could well have your name on it.